Hey, hello again, everybody. Welcome into another edition. This is Cross Functionality, the show connecting coaching, baseball, softball, male, female, hosted by former college baseball and softball players. You can probably guess which one is which. I'm Jim. Let me say hi. Cassie, what's going on? My friend, co-host, softball national champion at the University of Alabama, current day renowned coach, ready to talk some hitting today. Let's get this thing started, baby.
Very excited.
This is going
Always
to be a
excited.
good episode today, episode 43, common hitting misconceptions. You and I both love to talk about hitting, and we're going to discuss some of those misconceptions today. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, or on YouTube, the Softball Strength Academy YouTube page. I'm pulling something up on my phone that Cassie and I wanted to talk about here and start the show that kind of connects back to what we talked about last week in episode 42. And go back in the archives, of course, and listen to that episode, previous episodes as well. Bo Bichette, who right now leads all of Major League Baseball in hits. I think he's still the hits leader. At least he's in the top 5 in all of Major League Baseball. He's probably their best hitter, the Blue Jays' best hitter right now in their lineup with the struggles of Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and others. But Bo Bichette said this when asked a question about sitting on off-speed pitches and letting the fastball go by. This is what Bo had to say, and it connects back to what we talked about last week. Get to that in a second. But Bo said, yes, this is an exact quote, yes, but there are moments where they're probably not going to throw you a fastball. I think you have to be okay with letting the fastball go by sometimes. Again, that tells you all you need to know about major league hitters, Cassie, about their approaches. And it all stems back to that magical word that we talked about so much in previous episodes and really discussed it last week. You have to have an approach. And if your approach is foolproof and it's solid, you won't be afraid. Everything Bo just said right here, you won't be afraid to let that fastball go by right down the middle because you know you can still do damage on that next pitch if you have the correct approach and you're guessing correctly.
And again, like some of you might be listening to this and being like, "What are you talking about?"
That's right.
You have to
That's
speak.
okay.
It is, yeah. This is when you're facing that really tough pitcher. This is when you're at that next level of play where you're not. You have to play the odds, and it's very similar to if you have a hitter who is a pull hitter and it's late in the game and you have a shift on. You can't all of a sudden get upset when they, for the first time in 100 at bats, hit a dribbler down the opposite field line. You're playing the odds. And so when you're having an approach at the plate and you're saying, listen, this pitcher throws this breaking ball every single at bat, at least twice in at bat. I know I can hit this. This is what I've dialed up my plan for. This is what I'm cued in for. If all of a sudden you see that fastball and then you deviate from your plan, you're going to get yourself out on that fastball anyway. If granted, the plan changes with 2 strikes, but early in the count, this is where you're playing the odds. You're playing the odds where I'm sitting fastball. And you had mentioned before the show, you're just watching a game the other day. Guy takes a fastball down the middle. Maybe, who knows, an announcer, maybe someone has something to say about it, whatever it may be. Next ball is a breaking ball that he crushes because that's what his approach was. That's what he was sitting on. So it is just, that just goes to show, listen, the approach matters. It's always going to matter. And you do have to be okay, as hard as it may be to rewire some of the thought process, letting some of those quote unquote perfect pitches go by.
But you get so used to, as a hitter, having such a good approach that you don't really mind if that fastball goes by right down the middle. You just stick to your plan, and it's part of understanding the game. Gabe Kapler, manager of the Giants, recently said this. I don't know if you saw it, Cass. I think he said it within the last year or so. He talked about why not have hitters swing on 3-0? Why not tailor their approach to swing on 3-0? Because that's probably the best pitch you're going to get in that plate appearance. It might be the best pitch that you get all game. It might be that best pitch you get all week. Why would you wait until 3-1 when the pitcher gets a strike over, and then if he's feeling his breaking ball that day, or if the breaking ball might be his number 1 pitch and he might be getting all those swings and misses, why would you wait until 3-1? Why would you not swing on 3-0? That's going to be the best pitch you get all game. I think that's good logical thinking, and it really points to, again, having and tailoring that proper approach. So really you could do damage ultimately with that fastball, even if you take that fastball earlier in the at bat right down the middle, or of course doing damage with a breaking ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is you had said when you're so dialed into your approach, it's almost a success, to be honest with you. Like, you're sitting one speed, you're sitting breaking ball, you're sitting off speed, let's say, and the girl throws this fastball that hits the outside corner for a strike. You step out and you're not like, damn, I should have hit that. You're saying that's like it's like regardless that it was a strike or not, that's a victory in your book. You know what I mean? And so all of a sudden your confidence goes up because you're like, okay, cool. This is exactly, I'm sticking to my plan. And as a hitter, that's just reassurance. Like I'm dialed into the speed that I want to hit. So it is interesting. It's funny when you hear fans go, oh, like when a strike goes by or when announcers will say something, but then you see the hitter just completely unfazed. That's why.
Yeah. Yeah. Or fans go to Reddit and talk about that on their team's Reddit page. Why did this hitter take this pitch right down the middle? Well, we can answer that for you. Episode 43 today, common hitting misconceptions. Again, subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. We're on Pandora. We're on iHeart as well. And on YouTube, the Softball Strength Academy YouTube page. This week, we're breaking down common hitting misconceptions, both past and present. And it really comes down to stripping away all of the BS mechanics, right, and absolutes, and understanding what a hitter is really all about. Timing, swing plane, approach, among other things. These are all very, very important. But when you get rid of those common misconceptions, both past and present, and you must be careful that you don't blur the lines between absolutes and misconceptions. Oftentimes, coaches will do that. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But deciphering the two correctly will benefit hitters in the long run.
You know what? I had this idea for a while because we have viewers of this podcast, and then people who consume social media are going to be anywhere from people who have recently played and are able to access research and are really diving into a coaching career and can be all in, to parents who have completely different careers, maybe who played 20 years ago and are kind of just getting their feet wet again and trying to help out their kid with coaching. And for those that maybe don't have the time or resources available to dive into the nitty-gritty, like what's changed, this is, I think, very interesting to be able to go over. And very coincidentally, one of my Little League coaches that I've been very close with and stayed in touch with is actually coaching Special Olympics right now. And he stopped by my office recently and was like, hey, he's like, I haven't coached in 11 years. I just want to make sure, are people still teaching this? Is this still how things are going to go? So it was just, I guess that's the purpose of why we wanted to do the show and just kind of have these discussions. And something too is what is actually happening? What is just something that we feel is happening? And what's the difference between a cue versus a mechanical breakdown, right? Where's that blurred line between absolutes and maybe just this misconception that has been going on in our sport for a long time?
So let me ask you, before we get into some past misconceptions and present day misconceptions, why do you think coaches for a long time, and it's been high level college coaches, both baseball and softball, it's been professional coaches at the major league level, there's been people who have written books about hitting where these misconceptions have been very present and they've been oftentimes repeated on those pages in those books. Why do you think coaches have preached these things? Was it just a sign of the times? Was it something that was a feel versus real type thing that they really didn't truly understand? While feel versus real is very real, and it's something that's very important for a lot of hitters out there, why did the coaches always preach these misconceptions back in the 70s and 80s that have been proven scientifically and through trial and error not to be real?
I mean, it could be a combination of a lot of things, but I have to imagine at some point there was some confirmation bias, right? Had to be at some point their favorite hitter ever said, I just try to squish the bug, or I try to swing down on the ball to get that backspin. And they viewed it as working. It was like, well, they said they were doing this and it looked like they were doing this and it worked. And so I have to imagine then, and baseball is just such a old timey sport. I think it's helped the sport in some ways with still having a history to it, but I think it's hurt the sport in a lot of ways because there's so much new technology that has come out that I think has been faced with some resistance, right? You have organizations with old school coaches wanting to still teach a lot off of feel, and new school coaches that are saying, no, look at all this data, look at all this film, look at everything that we can gather about athletes now. So I have to imagine it's some type of confirmation or combination of, but there had to be at some point in their career where they heard something, they thought they saw something, and they were like, this must be it. This must be why this works. Or they felt it themselves and it worked for them.
It sounds like, some of the best coaches as well that have done this, but it sounds like they put a blanket over a large majority of people or hitters and said, this is what should be done, when one of the golden rules, correct me if I'm wrong, of coaching is you have to sometimes individualize, more than sometimes, a lot of times individualize with that player to get them right, both physically, both mentally.
Yeah, there's certain overarching principles that are going to apply, like
Yeah.
the way someone moves and the way someone creates power and the way, maybe we see a ball, like certain overarching principles. But I always get so nervous when I hear an absolute, when I hear every hitter should be doing this. Why isn't your hitter doing that? And the other thing too is when that absolute is in the form of a cue. So, hey, every hitter should be feeling like they're swinging down the ball. Every hitter should have this type of feel. That always gets me nervous because a cue is that interpersonal relationship again between the athlete and the coach.
Yeah.
And I have no problem if a coach tells an athlete to swing down on the ball because maybe they're trying to get them to level out on a high pitch. However, they need to know that that is a feel and not actually what's going on. That's not an overarching principle that we're now going to carry on for the next 20, 30 years in our sport. But maybe that's what we have to tell the athlete in order to achieve the actual swing that we want them to be swinging.
So be sure to follow us on social media at Jim Tara on both Twitter and Instagram, at Coach_CassieRB, at Coach_CassieRB on Instagram, at Coach CassieRB on Twitter. I was doing so well. I had like a 20-week
lesson
streak
learned.
there.
Lesson learned. If you ever make an Instagram and a Twitter, don't make them different things.
It's so that little underscore. It's so easy. Yet I don't look. 20 weeks. It was like 21 weeks in a row that I didn't fub.
You crushed it.
Yeah. No. So I'm proud.
You know it better than I do, if I'm being honest.
Episode 43 today. Common hitting misconceptions. Thank you for joining us as always. Let's talk about some here. I've got a bunch written down. We'll go first with the past, right? Past misconceptions. Sure. We'll talk about one of the worst of all time, squishing the bug. I mean, you're literally just corkscrewing yourself into the ground when you do that and literally pushing down the ground force that you could be generating. Back elbow up, barrel above the ball, swing down. Now see the barrel above the, but the swing down part, that you can almost, if a guy or a girl has a steep attack angle or a big launch angle, deep launch angle.
So it should be more barrel above hands is like the misconception, because that can never happen. The barrel above the ball is more like, right, if you have someone like a high spin rate guy throwing in baseball, a rise ball pitcher in softball, you might be needing to think barrel above the ball a little bit.
So you can kind of, with swinging down, almost reword it. That doesn't make it a misconception.
That's fair enough.
Maybe we can cross that one off the list. Okay.
You know what? You want to be on plane with the ball. That's the idea. And so if a hitter is plane is off and they are too steep and whatever, and you say, hey, listen, I need you to figure out this barrel above the ball type thing, fine. But it's not the actual thing that's happening on every single pitch.
So, all right. So squish the bug. That's probably the worst one. No?
Yeah. And you know what's so funny? It's like, okay, so why did that come about in the first place? And you watch old timey videos, right? And it's like, I don't know the frame rate per second, but it was like, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And so you're seeing Babe Ruth here, and then you're seeing Babe Ruth corkscrewed at the end of his swing, right? Like you're not quite getting the frame rates to be able to break down his swing piece by piece by piece. And I think the idea of it is like, okay, this is where you end up. You end up with your back foot completely turned. How do we get kids? How do we get people to really feel that? Yes, you want rotation in your swing, but I think we've talked about it till we're blue in the face. We want the rotation to be generated from that hip. We want it to be happening post to that front heel contact. That's when our rotation really does need to start happening. And it's not from the back foot spinning by any means. If anything, we don't want that back heel hanging out behind the line. So
could I add a misconception?
Please.
So squishing the bug with the back foot, right? That's probably like one of the worst ones of like all time. What about here's another one though. This might be 1A. What about you probably haven't heard this one in a very long time, but you probably did hear it from coaches when you were like 7, 8 years old, pivoting the front foot in your swing with the back foot. So like,
at the same time?
At the same time, thinking like, oh man, we're going to get maximum rotation here.
And again, but think about probably why that came about. You see the end of a swing, someone's front foot is open, their back foot's turned. It's like, duh, let's have this happen at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. What people don't know is that foot, correct me if I'm wrong, that foot opens up with the ground force that you've generated. For sure.
Well, right. And it honestly, for some hitters, depending on what type of hip they have, they'll land open and it's not even, that was actually keeping the front side closed longer.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of leads into this one where it's like so many people think, oh, okay, your front shoulder's opening up, your head's pulling off. You just need to land with a closed front foot and that'll fix your whole front side. When in actuality, we're not all designed with hips to be able to handle keeping your front foot closed. I think Juan Soto is maybe one of the only hitters who can like really get away with that type of mobility. His front foot is closed and his hips can really, really rotate. But most hitters very naturally, most little kids, watch little kids when they go to step, they'll land with it a little open so that their front hip can create room and the rest of their swing can actually happen.
It's so great we have the technology now to scientifically be able to tell if a guy or girl has the proper hip rotation or can get that amount of hip flexibility to where they can open or close. By the way, I just thought of this too with these common hitting misconceptions talking about this today, and you mentioned Juan Soto there. I would bet a decent amount of money. If I was a betting man, I would bet a decent amount of money that he probably doesn't even know that he lands closed or that his front foot is closed.
And you know what? It could be, yeah, and listen, I'm not like watching every single one of his at bats. This is a handful of videos I've seen on the internet where I'm like, wow, his foot is definitely more closed than I noticed most hitters. And I guess I'm partial to it because that was something through college that I thought I had to do. Yeah. And the amount of times I ended up like over my front foot because my hip is trying to drive and it has nowhere to go. It has to just go forward. It can't rotate. That was
who taught you that told you, hey, you gotta, you got to get that firm front side and get that leverage with your front foot completely closed.
I'm not 100% sure. I'm sure I heard it from some hitting coach, but it just made so much sense where I was like, oh, because you know what? I used to be, I had a big swing. I had a huge follow through and people used to tell me you're pulling your head too soon. Yeah. So I thought that was actually an issue I had. Granted, I go back and watch video and it's at contact, my head is fine. But I think in my head as a college athlete, I was like, okay, I have to keep my head down longer. This is probably going to help me. Or I thought I had an issue with coming too far forward on changeups and I thought this might help, Yeah. So
it almost stopped like the weight shift.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So the back elbow up, we kind of can almost like gloss over that because that doesn't mean anything.
It's such a blanket like, hey, go ahead and do that. Now, granted, like that elbow position, I actually care less about the elbow position and I care more about their wrist and hand position. We don't want a hand that's too cranked. We don't want a hand that's too let's see, this is
externally
flexed, rotated. Extended. Yeah. So you could talk about knocking knuckles too being lined up like they don't. Is
that a misconception? I've heard that. I mean, I don't know. Ichiro used to line up his knuckles, and you could tell when he was at the plate that he had the index finger laid out, and he had the knuckles lined up, right?
Right. So the way I've worded it is I do not think we need to force. Not everybody has the wrist mobility to handle the knuckles being perfectly lined up. What I say is you don't want those small knuckles on the top to pass the big knuckles on the bottom, because that's when you get a position where your wrist is flexed, right? So your top hand wrist is flexed. And now in order for you to get to a palm up position, you've just made it so much harder in your swing to get to that on playing position. So that little crank in your hand all of a sudden inhibits you getting to that position. Now you watch slow pitch softball players and they can get away with this because they don't need to be on the same type of plane as a faster pitch needs to be.
Yeah. So this is everything we're talking about today with these misconceptions, and it's leading into some other scientific conversations that we could have. This goes to show you how important it is, sport specific wise, to lift correctly and to train correctly. You have to have the proper wrist mobility so you don't, as you mentioned, turn that palm over, right? You should have the proper hip mobility and work on your hip mobility and your glute strength so that you can land your front foot open and get the proper leverage. So that's where I'm glad science has really, and numbers and the data that we've really advanced to that point to now we can lift and work out properly to get our athletes with the proper mobility in the proper position that gives them the best success. Mm-hmm. When you think about that, right, you forget about all the misconceptions at that point.
Right. Yeah. And granted too, like you might have someone with a really explosive swing and they're like, why do I need the weight room? And it's like, so you can continue either getting explosive or we can apply some brakes to your body, because you're going to have the weight room is going to be just as good for preventing injury as it is for you advancing in your strength and performance as well. That just building resiliency so that you can be consistent over 68 games in a season, 160 games in a season. That's really where the conditioning of your body matters.
Yeah, we talk so much, with scouts and everything. They always say, and you've talked to many scouts and coaches, does he have a big league type body? It doesn't matter the size of the body. Can he play at least 150 games over a consistent period of time throughout his career? If he's injury prone, that's not going to work.
Makes it hard, right?
Simply not going to work for the organization. It's not going to be a good investment, and it's not going to help the player progress in their career.
Amen.
Amen to that. Amen, Jimbo. Follow me on social media at Jim Terra. Be sure to email us to your questions, jimbopodcast21@gmail.com. Next week, we're talking about breaking bad habit loops. That'll be episode 44. We're not done, though, here, episode 43. We're going to talk now about new misconceptions in the year 2023, new misconceptions that for whatever reason have been brought to light with new technology, new data, misconceptions that have grown in the past, say, decade, right? Talking about some new misconceptions. Some of it has to do with approach. We talked about that Bo quote earlier and him taking a fastball previously right down the middle, or the propensity for major league hitters to do such a thing and still be okay in that plate appearance. So that's a misconception right there. Taking a fastball right down the middle ruins your plate appearance. Not necessarily true.
Right. And shoot, we've talked about it. We're going to continue talking about it. But I think that is if you're coaching little league athletes who are seeing one strike every at bat because pitching is so all over the place, this is not when that principle applies. When we're getting into higher level travel ball, higher level high school, collegiate level, professional level, this is when those principles begin to apply.
Yeah. What other new misconceptions do you have in the year 2023 that over your time as a coach you've seen grow and you're trying to get rid of with your athletes?
Sure. Yeah. So I can allude to one that is, I think these are more conversation points that need to be had, because it's hard to call them a misconception because they kind of haven't lived in baseball or softball for years. These are new things that have come up, but we're seeing a lot of, especially with technology, you have hitters who are trying to, again, get into these absolute positions. They're trying to, hey, can I get on plane by getting my rear elbow into this slot, into this layback position so I can get on plane sooner? And what ends up happening is one of two things. If we have an athlete who has a really, really tight shoulder capsule or a really tight lat, right? So your lat is an internal rotator of your shoulder. That can lead to it's a decelerator of your shoulder. If you have tightness there, what's going to happen is you're going to end up needing to get into your side bend a little bit more in order to make space for this back arm to get through, because it's not going to have the mobility to be able to do it itself. Additionally, let's say you are a right-handed thrower and a lefty hitter, well, of course, this shoulder capsule is not going to be have as much external rotation available because you don't throw from that side. So again, that hitter is going to need to probably make up for it by being in a side bend a little bit more. So you might have this coach who's looking at a hitter's swing and then maybe comparing to a higher level athlete or a professional athlete, being like, why doesn't this line up? We need to make these adjustments. We need to fix X, Y, and Z, without realizing that there's certain mobility limitations based on tightness, based on just structurally how they're built. So I think those are red flags I've seen. Just technology's getting better. Video of athletes is getting better. You have coaches who are knowing enough to like start to make these tweaks, but they maybe don't know the whole story, maybe everything that's going on with an athlete.
So they just know enough, these coaches. Isn't that's such a thing that you see every day in life, where you get the outskirts of something or a topic and then you think that you're an expert,
or at least equipped to do certain changes.
Right,
yeah,
right. And Elon Musk has said this before: the key to learning anything is to learn the pillars of that subject. But people think they're learning the pillars of the subject, but they're actually not. They're learning different things that don't really apply to the meat of the subject that gets them to learn the proper way. And I think that's an imposter syndrome that we see so many times now with hitters and hitting coaches, more specifically on social media. I know, change the algorithm, but with hitting coaches and just in general, people thinking they know more than they actually do. And they're just recycling old principles about hitting. But at the same time, I've noticed, are creating new misconceptions in year 2023. So it's kind of a nasty cycle.
For sure. So something I learned with the Pirates, and to be honest, it's very, very similar to stuff that we're working on with our athletes that are 17, 18, 19, these older athletes. I think as coaches, we sometimes think, okay, our job is to fix the athlete. Let's Let's find what's wrong with them and then let's fix it. And when I was with the Pirates, there was a double-A hitter. He had he had a long femur, and what that did is it really put him into a quad dominant position. And it didn't. When we talk about a hinge position in the stance or in the swing, we talk about a hitter being able to shove their butt back, maybe have their knee in line with their front foot, and have them be in this little bent over position. And this hitter just wasn't really able to achieve those positions. He was in his younger 20s. And the Pirates was like, yeah, we're not going to try to spend his entire time here trying to fix that one little thing. He is a high ball hitter. He is someone who's going to maybe sit in his quad a little bit more. He's looking from belly button and up or waist and up. And that's his sweet spot. And we have a pitcher that is a high spin rate guy. We're putting him in the lineup. And it was so interesting that the coaching philosophy was like, instead of spending all this time trying to fix something that we could maybe get just a little bit better on, we are going after what you are already good at, and we are making that part of your approach, or making that part of your game plan, and we are making this be that much like what you're already good at, that much better.
Yeah, I was going to say a misconception. I want to ask first, though, before I name the next one. This is kind of what I think is a misconception. I actually really despise this one a lot. Do you use the word hinge by any chance?
Yes, when I have an athlete who it works for, if that makes sense. So if an athlete is super quad dominant and I'm trying to get them into a posterior dominant position, and I say, I know they're in the weight room downstairs, and I'm like, hey, if you were going to start your hinge, where would you go? And all of a sudden it corrects it. I'm like, beautiful. It works. Okay. That works for you. So again, that's a cue. Really, we're just defining an athlete not being quad dominant and trying to get into a posterior dominant position.
Yeah, because I it's fine when it's used like you do as a cue, but I'm not sure coaches use it way too often when they're breaking down. I guess that this is the way I should put it. I shouldn't put it in a coaching context. When they're breaking down film or video of, say, Mike Trout. Mike Trout's a big one on social media that coaches like to point to and say he hinges with that back hip. I don't agree, because a hinge, if anybody is in the weight room or they lift weights, they understand what a good morning bend is. I'm sure you understand what that is. Good for your posterior chain. That's a hinge. That is by definition a true hinge. If a hitter were to do that, everything would be out of whack. So Mike Trout isn't necessarily hinging, and maybe that's a cue that he may use, or other hitters and coaches like yourself use, to help a hitter get less quad dominant. But just to put a blanket statement over a hitter and say, well, he hinges every time in his swing when he does hit for power or when he does hit gap to gap, in my opinion, that's a misconception, and it's completely wrong.
It's fair. Yeah, right. So I think the torso angle is probably like maybe what they're going off of, and it's just the initial stage, right? So but it still isn't the same. They're not good morning. They're not RDLing. They're not deadlifting, right? So yeah, I get what you mean. But it's funny because it is something that is just, I think too. So something else that drives me nuts that people talk about is when they say the hitter is separating, and they're talking about the hands moving away from the front foot. Yeah. When true separation is that front hip committing with the shoulder staying back. So whenever I teach at clinics, I always say, listen, people have used separation to define a phase in the swing, but true separation of the human body as it pertains to creating power is our hip going before the upper body, right? You're getting that X factor, essentially, what people used to talk about.
That's like that old saying, walk away from the hands.
Yeah, which I'll still use that for a hitter who's coming all at once, but that isn't what separating traditionally is.
Yeah. You use these cues, certain cues. Juan Soto, you ever see that drill that he does with the knob to the bat?
Yes.
Knob of the bat to the ball?
Yep.
That's just a cue. That's not the type of swing he wants to actually take, those who don't know that out there. But you as a coach, you have to be really, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert here on coaching, but you have to be really careful to make these players understand what a cue is and what not to do at the plate. Like I said, again, you don't actually want to swing down on the ball, but you may say to a hitter, as that was a previous misconception we talked about, you may say to a guy or girl, level out the swing a little bit, or your attack angle is this. I want you to feel like you're chopping down, and all of a sudden their swing is leveled out and their attack angle is fixed.
Right.
Or like the example you gave of that player in the Pirates organization who really doesn't have much success hitting that low ball. One thing you could do if you wanted to address that situation is to simply say, hey, let's try to swing up more. Let's make your swing plane a little bit steeper. Things like that are actually cues, but are sometimes misguided when it comes to coaching and disguised as misconceptions, but they could be used as cues to help those hitters.
100%. I mean, it's you're trying to recalibrate the hitter, right? So some people walk in and they're like, what are you doing with this girl? Because I've put a cone 5 feet out in front and I've put a ball high in a tee and I say, you need to hit a ground ball before that cone. And people are like, that's not how you hit. I'm like, you're right. But this girl has swung and missed about 10 times off of a tee on a ball. We need to recalibrate where she's at. And it's, am I going to do that for 45 minutes? Of course not. Am I going to do that to showcase and make sure she controls her swing instead of just going out there and swinging? Yeah, I'm going to do it with some hitters. And I think coaches need to have a little bit more confidence sometimes in having those discussions and putting those discussions out on social media, knowing they're going to get ridiculed. I know I put posts out there sometimes and drills out there that people are going to be like, that's ridiculous. But the conversation is, this isn't going to work for every hitter, but this might work for that 1 or 2 hitters whose brain works similarly to this individual's.
Yeah, and if you want to have those conversations, just visit Cassie's Twitter page at Coach Cassie RB, and then of course on Instagram at Coach_Cassie RB. I shouldn't have got it wrong, by the way. I'll tell you why, because it's underneath your
That's right.
your Instagram handle. So there's really no excuse now. Okay, so did we hit on everything today? Common misconceptions when it comes to hitting, episode 43.
I think so. I think if the only thing to add to the conversation is that maybe in a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, whatever it may be, there will be future misconceptions that we are talking about as it pertains to technology. Because the next thing is people are gonna be like, you know what? We thought the relationship between this metric and this metric was important, but it's actually this. And so I'm excited for those.
Yeah. So, and next week, we're going to be talking about breaking bad habit loops. This kind of ties in with some misconceptions as well. You may be doing some of those misconceptions or taking those cues as a hitter too far, and it's time to break those bad habit loops.
There you go. I love it.
Yeah. As we continue on talking some hitting here in the month of June, we've got some good topics coming up. So again, be sure to subscribe, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, Pandora, iHeart. We're on TuneIn as well. Not sure if people use those type of platforms. I noticed that a lot of people use, obviously, Apple, but Spotify is the big thing that all the kids are using, right? And TikTok. Oh, I want to add one more thing before we go here. And Softball Strength Academy YouTube page to watch the show. Kids, speaking of TikTok, and Jake said this on the Lab Epstein Hitting podcast this week, and this is very important. I'm sure you agree too. Watch the game. You'll learn. You'll learn a lot about watching the game, what hitters are doing. Put yourself in that. You talked about it last week when you're watching the softball national championships, the softball college women's collegiate softball World Series. You're putting yourself in the hitter's shoes, and you're trying to guess, and you're thinking along with the pitcher. That's what young kids do. That get off TikTok for a second, watch a couple of innings, baseball or softball, and try to put yourself in the position of that hitter. Understand what the pitcher might be doing to you, because ultimately, what's new is what's old in both baseball and softball.
Amen. I'm waiting for Win Reality or some type of virtual reality to allow us to watch the game that way, as if we maybe are playing it. That would be,
Well, Sunday Night Baseball.
One day, Jim.
Sunday night. We should invent that, and we should just call it cross functionality. And that'll be, the Sunday Night Baseball's trying it with the ump cam, but it's almost there.
It's getting there.
That'll be really cool virtual reality one day. All right, next week, breaking bad habit loops. Thank you for watching and listening. Have a great week. We will talk to you then.